You're listening to Atoms, Motion, and the Void. The Last Chore of Dudgeon Lurie. Dudgeon Lurie liked to sneak up behind people. He would creep and plod and hold his breath and lay a shushing hand across his change-filled pocket. And then he would tap you on the shoulder. You would of course turn toward the tap shoulder and keep right on turning. For Dudgeon loved, almost more than anything else, to spin people in circles largely of their own making. When you'd finally toddle about, there he'd be, peeking at the sky and whistling Dixie. His version of whistling, anyway, dribbly air blown through kissed lips. But what Dudgeon really wanted with this tapping was to see if you might have a little job for him. There were $1 jobs, sweeping, picking up, $2 jobs such as fetching something from somewhere or making a delivery. I suppose there might have been $5 jobs and $10 jobs, but I only ever paid $2, and mostly I paid him to commence moving away from me as quickly as possible. Dudgeon had a great preference for coins, and we became a coin-heavy town, a town of clinking and jangly pockets. At any rate, I just now imagined he was creeping up behind me, a hard finger about to tap my shoulder, and so performed an unnecessary full rotation in the forest. But I suppose that means that I've begun to look for him. Whenever I find myself sensing taps and doing circles, the search is, unfortunately, on. And so I have begun to scan the trees and move along with a hunter's grace and wariness, looking for signs of broken twigs or footsteps in the mud. I've just done another go-round, spooking myself, it seems. I am in that part of the old woods where the air is cooler and moister and somehow younger. Old forests in their fluffs of newly minted air, moss beds almost too beautiful to notice, bubbling below cemetery thickets that sometimes depress. Somewhere a river, no wind, the kicked, puddled smell of rotten wood. Why I look for Dudgeon from time to time is a question. Part of the answer is that he left town a while ago, possibly in the midst of a $2 chore I'd set for him, returning a book or books to the library, or fetching one or several, taking a pile of mail to the post office. There was something printed and papery about the task, I seem to recall. Of course I waited after his disappearance for some evidence of the unfinished business, a late notice from the library, or a phone call to remind me that I had a book waiting, a red flag letter from a miscellaneous agency, a yellow warning from the electric company, some calling out to me that something was amiss, the way the world reveals our shared memory and will sound alarms when one goes astray of the plan. But there was no echo of the abandoned shore, and as I like to say, cleverly when I was younger and now with some wistfulness, I remain unrepercussed. I turn slowly in one circle and then another. I hear his name on the air, Dudgeon Lurie, Dudgeon Lurie, Dudgeon Lurie. No one. Nothing. But perhaps I'm simply recalling that he carved his name on a nearby tree. It's somewhere hereabouts, I'm sure. Perhaps I'll look for it, and finding it, be done with him for a while. Before he left for parts unknown, or died in the woods, for we really don't know, Dudgeon Lurie was, as they say, a fixture in town. If he was not here, he would be there, etc., until one spotted him. One could always find him if one looked, is what I mean. Unless he was creeping up on you, and then he would find you. Horse large and cloud slow, Dudgeon was the sort of uncertain type who seemed to lag behind himself somehow. His baby's face and stem-like blonde hair, his changing limps and limb twitches and cavings in toward sudden pains. I recall that he wore for a time, strapped behind each ear, tumor-like, a skin-toned hearing aid. These were at some point replaced by band-aids, or perhaps were always so. But he needed hearing aids, is what I mean. He certainly had difficulty with sounds, the coming and the going, and could never really make himself understood. He was, however, a tremendous gesturer. Douglas Lowry was his birth name, and there was a question as to whether he knew this, for he both introduced himself as Dudgeon Lurie and spelled it that way as well, which capsized and sinking signature was commonplace around town. Not only was he the first to put himself down on any sign-up sheet, to bring food to a potluck, for example, which, by the way, he attended without ever bringing anything but himself. But as well he wrote his name anywhere he might, on scraps of paper, on any of the announcement boards. And he painted his name on the rocks below the trestle, and scribbled it in pencil on bathroom walls, and he would spell his name in pebbles at the river, and dig it into the sand with his stick by the lake, and there are trees in the forest into whose bark he carved his full name with a knife, one of which carved instances, as I have mentioned, I feel I am very nearly in the vicinity of. I have just completed another spin around myself. Thank you very much, Dudgeon. As I also mentioned, it is very like, after the many years of hearing him say his name aloud and seeing it scattered everywhere about, that a kind of song of his name can be heard in the air, as though he carved it there as well. Dudgeon Lurie, Dudgeon Lurie, Dudgeon Lurie. I hear it, anyway, in the same way I sometimes hear the whoosh of truck traffic from the wilderness valley, where there is little but trees and wind. And yes, I have gone along and about the valley looking for some secret highway. Nothing. Aside from his name, which we understood given his spelling of it, the rest of his communication was a jumble. He would, for example, say that he lived in ancient Orange. He would say things that sounded like, "This way to the pile?" He would often ask, "Does it or don't it?" And in parting, Dudgeon would almost very clearly say, "If you seen 'em?" Those are just approximations of the sounds he made, although they always did slash upwards in the manner of questions. He did not, of course, live in an ancient Orange, or anything that could be construed to rhyme with such, but in a room above a hay barn at the very edge of town. I have visited his barn and stared at it, and mulled. Ancient Orange, Ancient Orange. Our town name is Lemon, so possibly Dudgeon imagined he lived in a prior version of it. Perhaps fruit was ordered in some chronological way in his mind, and oranges preceded lemons. He had no job, but kept himself busy working here and there. Every morning he would stand in front of the Lemon Cafe and open the doors to let customers in. Though it was often attempted, he would never accept money for this small service. That came later, with his tap-tapping. There were, in fact, people in town who would not enter the cafe if Dudgeon propped the door for them, who would stand in a black rage until he let the door swing shut and looped away. I myself was one of these, though I wouldn't say my rages were so grimly dark. It was mostly that I wished he'd learned that I preferred to open the door myself. I did not wish to begin my day with the debit of being beholden to him. But in fact, do the regular offers of change or cash, and even, I suppose, do these difficult moments of impasse at the door, he soon had a work-around to make this free service less obvious, more clearly an act of politeness. Instead of standing at the door as he once did, Dudgeon found a method whereby he might arrive at the door just ahead of you. Opening the door, he would stand back and make his regal "please enter" gesture, which gesture seemed to imply that he would soon follow. But follow he did not. He walked in loops and circles and up and down the way, scanning for those regular cafe patrons he knew were inbound, creating the illusion of one civilized villager arriving just ahead of another, though we of course knew what he was up to. I suppose he simply did not wish the conspicuous complication, at least in the morning, of being treated the town beggar. It was as though he was saying, "The first thing I do for you each day is free." In the afternoons he set to work, creeping and hushing his pockets and tapping shoulders, and he could be seen at various work sites, holding tool bags for the road makers, or directing traffic at such places. And I have seen him with the firemen, sponging down their great red truck, and I have seen him carrying luggage to and from the train at the station, and I have seen him on his knees in gardens pulling weeds, and mowing lawns and digging holes, and I have seen him raking leaves alone in the cemetery, and I have seen him sweeping up the sidewalk with a broom he stowed in the alley, and I have watched how he brushed up the small piles, and shifted the debris into bags if he had them, or into his massive coat pockets if not, which handfuls he later separated, discarding the paper trash into the bin, and letting loose the sticks and leaves and dust and such into the forest, as though releasing small families of captured creatures. Offloading trucks behind the hardware store, I've seen him there, painting sheds and standing uncertainly in the fields with the cows. Yes, not sure what that job was exactly, but he managed to make it look like farm work, a shepherd of cows, perhaps. When apparently none of these tasks were to be had, no work on the street or train at the station, the cafe and stores closed, no shoulders to tap, and perhaps a little rain falling, Dudgeon would stand or sit somewhere, in the park or some street corner, and he would wave. He would wave to anyone who passed in cars, anyone in the distance, anyone he could see, any dog or cat or animal that tumbled by, horses, squirrels, turtles, birds, and dragonflies. These wavings were provided free of charge, in the spirit of his morning door work. He set no hat on the ground, and he would refuse all offers at such times. In the afternoons, in the parlor attached to the cafe, where the longer-term patrons relaxed, Dudgeon would sometimes sit at the decorative piano and softly play one note after another. Not music at all, the opposite, I suppose. Unpleasant-sounding, simple notes allowed to die and touched so softly as to suggest that perhaps his goal was not to make any sound at all, but to remove it. He must have long ago begun with cacophonies, for he is generally rough with objects, but over the years had learned this grating and sensitive style that still had a kind of beauty for being so hardly there as performed by one who was altogether too much there. At some point during these unwanted concerts, possibly because of the very intrusive quietness of his playing, someone would ask him to leave. And it wouldn't be fair to exclude the fact that there was constant talk, while he was still here, of how we might best be rid of him. Even his supporters were precariously in favor of his departure, as though they'd set a rule for themselves to only do goodly things upon this earth, and here was Dudgeon Lurie, their surest test. Perhaps another town might like him, was their eccentric wonder. I recall one of those dear souls once stood and delivered a kind of general eulogy, or enticement to reconsider the Dudgeon situation, which was later written down and passed around from one to another for our more intimate deliberation. Something about our need to welcome those around us, or to be kind to certain someones in ways we weren't, to not strike anyone down, or some such, although this entreaty was never delivered to me. What can be done about Dudgeon Lurie was an unwritten item on the agenda of every town meeting, meetings Dudgeon himself attended, oblivious to all the items, especially the one about him, though he would say his name aloud when he heard it. Despite his various co-opted functions, his sweeping and carrying and delivering, and the committed dear souls among us who supposed other towns might be searching for one such as he, there really was no one in town who truly wished him to stay. Did we feel good plotting against him? Of course not. Yet even this small communal shame was held against him. Such is the weight of these intractable matters that the burden continues to accumulate without end. And then one day he was gone. The fact stole upon us slowly, like Dudgeon himself, from behind, and even with a small tap-tap. Something was missing, a colour, or a bench, or a pretty stone from the park. It was during the aftermath of a minor traffic accident that we first realized he might no longer be with us, for he was the co-star of all such troubles. He could often be found seated in the passenger seat of a freshly wrecked car, or standing beside the frost-pink star of a flare, or waving the traffic along, or seeming to convene with the attending officer, a central player in the unexpected chaos of our daily lives. If there was a photo of a house fire in the Lemon Times, you could be sure that Dudgeon would be in it. But no Dudgeon was seen that day, and then it was so easy to notice no one opening the door, playing the piano, sweeping the sidewalk, waving at squirrels. Perhaps he'd simply rolled them into the river, but it was discovered that he had removed his painted name from the big rocks below the trestle. All that remained on the penciled bathroom walls were thumbed and smoky sketches. But surely there was nothing he could do about the tree carvings, although I believe I am standing in the little clearing where before I had spotted one. But even these small tours around each tree, hand to bark, have left me stymied. Yet of course I am spinning now and then, perhaps a little more often than I should, and so there is an element of bewilderment to this investigation, of almost dizziness. I should say I am not the only unnecessary circler in town. I have seen others looping about themselves at the phantom request of Dudgeon's tap-tap. Neither, lately, is it surprising to find an imitation doorman at the Lemon Café. Laughter, as such a one, will tend the little joke of looping off, as though they aren't in need of going in. And I have seen a new casual breed of friendly waver on the benches. Once or twice I have sat and listened as this or that someone sat down at the decorative piano in the cafe parlor to give a Dudgeon-like recital. I have myself, at the moment, a few handfuls of rough debris in my smallish pockets, gathered up from the sidewalks with Dudgeon's alley broom, separated out from the bits of trash which I tossed in the litter bin he favored. And I continue my habit of collecting a few dollars change before leaving home in the morning, a bulging anchor of nickels and quarters and dimes that I truly believe slows me down. My go-away Dudgeon money, as I thought of it. I reach into my dirty pocket now and pick out a handful of those coins to set upon the forest floor, near the tree I most think his name should be carved upon, and then begin to pinch the sticks and dust from my pockets and drop this business over the silver circles. A buried treasure, soon with a map I'll never make, with a legend I'll never invent, to this secret spot in ancient Orange, letting loose the sticks and leaves and dust and such over the coins on the forest floor, releasing Dudgeon Lurie's small families of captured creatures. Below the rambling change and street muck, finally, a little tab of paper rises. Instantly, I gather it to be the transcribed eulogy of that do-gooding dear soul, and I may soon wonder if it was this that Dudgeon passed to me, before whatever it was that happened to him next. Was this perhaps his last chore that I or someone else had charged him with, to bring this scrap to me? And in such haste to pay him into the distance, it must have slipped my mind as the note sank below the sea of his future change. I read this scrap of eulogy now above his creatures and his coins by his tree in ancient Orange, although I must say sadly, I doubt there is anything on earth that could change my mind about him. To be heard and to be known and to be permitted somewhere, to be home and to have friends, a family, a community, to be one with and have the easy touch of and the meeting of eyes and the understanding of minds, and not necessarily the full sympathy of, at least the general care of, and the nearly sure knowledge that one will be missed, to know that one will not be abused, that one is looked forward to at times, and to know that one is welcome. No unwanted visitor, no outsider here, submerged where all else swims, in dark when all else is lit, to be let in and not set upon, to especially not be struck, to not be so struck and struck and struck again. You've been listening to Atoms, Motion, and the Void. For more information, please visit radioghost.com or atomsmotion.com. Thank you, my friends.